talk about how we organize our chemistry labs in teacher education. And what I'm going to take you through is a very short agenda. We will be talking about the specifics of chemistry education and teacher training in Germany, and then I'll take you through our approaches, some challenges we face, and the opportunities which arise from this. So Germany is, well, in Europe, we have 80 million people living in 16 different states. Now, this is important because the states organize educational issues, and this also concerns curricula and what students learn and what students at school and at university learn. We've got some kind of a head organization, which we in short call KMK. It's a standing conference of the ministers of education. And they define some general learning outcomes and standards, but then the 16 different states are free to differentiate this according to what they think is necessary or what makes sense. So we are faced with very different chemistry curricula, and our schooling is somewhat different from what you know from the States or from the UK and so on. It starts very easy. We've got one kind of school, it's called primary school, and kids go to school when they turn 6 years or around 6 years, and they stay there for 4 years. So grade 1 to 4 spent at primary school, and we've got special teachers for that. Afterwards, we've got an external differentiation, which means that the pupils, I should say pupils when I mean those who learn at schools, and students when I mean those who learn at universities. So the pupils are streamed for ability, and we've got on the secondary level different kinds of schools. Some of them only go from grade 5 to 10. Others, which we call gymnasium, go from grade 5 to 12 or 13, depending on which state you are in. So this is the higher level, and you leave this kind of school with a leaving certificate we call Abitur after year 12 or 11, depending on the state. So this is necessary if you want to go to university. And for us, it is important to know what the students who come to our university have learned at school when they took chemistry. When do they do this? Starting in primary school, kids are taught natural science on a very first approach. This also covers geography and practical things like how to move through the traffic and things like this as a pedestrian or as taking your bike. Afterwards, in secondary education, on the first level, every pupil has to start with chemistry in grade 7 or 8 when they are about 13 years old, and they've got 2 hours of chemistry per week for 3 years. So that's quite a lot. But as they are quite young when we start with a rather phenomenological approach. First starting with everyday life, as this is indicated by this cake on the left-hand side. You don't need to read this. This is just a visual impression you should get. And we start very easy using word equations, then moving on to reaction equations. We start with very simple models, particle models, then moving on to more sophisticated ones. But still, we are moving onwards, and when pupils reach the secondary level 2, we could say, they can choose to carry on taking chemistry. And there's 2 different kinds of courses they can choose from. One is a basic one. It's 3 hours per week, around about. I'm just talking about the state I'm living in. It may vary a little bit. And then there's advanced courses with 5 hours per week. So there are students entering our university with their Abitur diploma, but they can have very different chemical backgrounds. This includes theoretical as well as practical experience. When they come to university, now I'm referring to our university because the situation is a bit diverse, but in a way it is representative. In 14 out of 16 states, we have a bachelor-master system. And what is special about Germany maybe is that if students decide to enroll in teacher training programs, they have to pick 2 subjects they are going to teach later on when they are finished with their teacher training. So we have in our bachelor studies 76 credit points, they study chemistry, and the same amount they do taking another subject, plus pedagogy. So this makes up our curriculum here. If they move on, they enter a Master of Education, and this is rather focused on the educational part. So the amount of chemistry is rather low, and most of the chemical practical training concerning the subject chemistry is done in the bachelor already. So they have finished their university, but they are not teachers yet, because there's still another 1.5 years of internship at school, at the school form they intended to teach later on. So this is when in Germany one finally can call himself or herself a chemistry teacher. Now, as we have this diverse, these diverse ways of becoming a teacher, we have diverse programs at university. But what all have in common is that we have to do the splits, basically, between the mother science, chemistry, and the learning and the focus on the learners of chemistry. So here you see a typical lab which our students encounter when they go the scientific way or have their scientific paths, where they learn the core concepts and scientific methods of chemistry, and when they get their first glimpses into research of chemistry. On the other hand, we have the chemical education approach, and our labs are a little bit different there, and the focus is different because they have to go to learn the school chemistry. So those are the aspects or topics or areas of chemistry which need to be taught to pupils at school. And this also comes along with the typical kind of experiments they do have to carry out. And the 3 main factors everybody is probably struggling with if they are teaching at school is safety, costs, and time. So a school experiment differs very much from a scientific experiment. And then, of course, we have to think about the teaching of experiments. So if we look at the education in the chemistry lab, we have the chemistry approach, which is in the bachelor quite big. It has, depending on the kind of school you intend to go to, 18 credit points, and we try to have a selection of representative labs covering general chemistry, inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, and for those who opt for for being teachers at gymnasium at the highest level, they have a quantitative analysis practical as well. In these labs, we mix everybody together. So all of the students trying to or aiming at becoming a teacher, but they are also together with the Bachelor of Science students to intermingle with them and get different perspectives, and also have a way of opting in or out of the career of becoming a teacher. Then we do have a small part in the bachelor's of school chemistry lab, and as you can see here, we are facing very different apparatus. As you all know, if you've been at school and seen typical easy to set up experiments, this is one of those kits that you can use for demonstrating fuel cells. Now this certainly differs from organic chemistry apparatus, as we can see. In the master, we have more room to actually teach typical experiments that you need for being a school teacher. And our teaching aims are this is quite clear, to learn to safely and successfully carry out our school experiments. And we are actually offering a big program of experiments on all different areas to be covered in teaching chemistry at school. So this focuses on practical skills and demo experiments. What is more interesting, I think, from an educational perspective, is that other than in the chemistry lab practicals, we give students the opportunity to actually think about their own development of apparatus and own procedures to answer a problem. It could be a given problem or one that they actually found themselves. So we try to promote inquiry-based learning. And as a practical part, we try to prepare students to later on be able to cope with scarce conditions, I would say. As if you've been a teacher at school, you know, sometimes you are lacking apparatus, you don't have the money to buy expensive glass equipment and so on. So it needs a lot of creativity and understanding of setups, which we try to practice with our students using boxes containing different materials, and the question, can you try to find a setup to actually carry out an electrolysis of zinc iodide in this case, using cheap materials like lead mines from a pencil, this is difficult to see alternative glass equipment like those plastic boxes from mints, for example. Another thing we are talking to our students in the lab is how they think, and we're discussing this in the plenum with the whole group, how they can actually teach students or pupils to carry out these experiments, because this is a different perspective, and this is what our first speaker talked about too. So this is all got to do with chemistry specific aspects. And what I want to focus in the next minutes on is something that we have also to focus on due to the fact that our world is changing constantly, and we do have normative aspects given from the KMK, for example, which has already been implemented in our curricula. And those are these three big topics. It's the use of digital media and digitalization. It's teaching sustainability, and it's inclusion. And since I don't have that much time, I want to focus on ICT and how we try to establish a program within our ChemLab education to implement digital media. So what first we thought about what students need to know, and they need to know how to use digital media in the lab for measuring and sensing. And as we have learned from talking to teachers in teacher training courses, was that students, once they are finished with university, are usually used to one special kind of product from some company, and sometimes they're reluctant to use different stuff. And so we actually implemented in our labs different systems in order to lower anxiety about using a new kind of product, because after all, there's lots of parallels in all those devices. So this is one thing. The other aspect we want to use ICT is documentation of lab work. So we are focusing at actually producing electronic lab protocols. And then the last bit is the production of digital media. These are based on experiments, but then actually added by contexts from everyday life and contents from chemistry to make a complete product as a teaching tool. So we call this program GCHEM Lab, and we do this in a kind of spiral curricular way. in the bachelor laboratory that our students enter, they have their first digital documentations. They take pictures of setups and short videos, which they don't edit any further. And as I already said, they start doing digital measurements. So we then move on, not in a practical, but in a seminar. The red lettering is always aiming at practical lab work, and the black lettering is always aiming at theoretical seminars. So then in the next step, they talk about existing digital media and analyze this, looking at didactical added value and so on. In the next step, they actually, in the master's laboratory, they create alternative electronic protocols, including videos, which they actually start to edit as well. And alongside this, we have seminars where electronic learning tools are actually created. And in the last step, everything of these competencies is brought together when they have what we call project work, which has 50% lab work and 50% theoretical work or editing, and they actually produce explanatory videos, including experiments and other aspects they have talked about and discussed and experienced in the theoretical seminars. So we try to build up those digital media competencies in our ChemLab courses, and this then leads to some really nice projects where our students in the masters explore innovative topics. This is the linker to our curricular innovation research, and they produce these explanatory videos. I'm looking at the time. I still have time to start to actually give you some glimpse of one of those videos. If my mouse is actually working. This is only the highlighter, which is a bit, oh, this is disappointing. Now, wait, if I can fix this. Maybe this will work. I'm just looking at a workaround, which doesn't actually do what I want it to do. Now, I'll try to hand this over to you later on if you want to, but it's in German. I actually wanted to comment this in English, but I guess we have to live without this. So actually what you could have seen would have been a video produced by a student who is working on biological fuel cells. And she actually videographed the setup of the experiment. She had the measurement of an established voltage, also done by digital measurements of what the cell actually brings forward. And she also has elements where she explains the processes taking place inside those cells using small animations and so on. Now this is really bad, but I can't help it right now. So let's go on with what the students report as perceived learning outcomes. We asked our students, it's a very small number of students who've run through all of this so far, so I can't really present you a representative study of this. So this is perceived learning outcomes. And the students report on growth of their competencies regarding the exploration of new experiments and possible alterations of the setups. Because sometimes it's easier to change a setup, because then you don't have the problem of reflections. If you take a video, you do have to change a setup, maybe to a bird's eye perspective to actually show what's happening inside a reaction vessel. So they actually get to some extent involved in participation in our innovation research. They very carefully have to plan and carry out their demo experiments if they are doing these videos, because it's a different way of doing this. It's like staging an experiment. They have to think about the visibility and about the proper language they use to comment the processes taking place inside, for example, a fuel cell. So this is quite time demanding, but on the other hand, it is actually giving new opportunities of looking at experiments and actually setting up experiments. And well, they produce didactic digital learning tools for lab activities. So we try to bring these two aspects, practical lab work and digitalization, together. To conclude, looking at the time, it's necessary. It's really demanding in Germany because of the variety of different teacher training programs to actually move between the science and the teaching of the science. We need a lot of differentiation inside our practical labs, but normative directives that gives us new opportunities to reorganize and reflect our chem labs, and hopefully this then finally leads to a better program of teacher training. So the team that helps me to do all this, you can see this on this picture here. And the second picture actually shows you that our university is on top of a hill. And I'm sitting in this brand new building right here, which I'm circling here. So this is where I'm actually sitting. If you want to contact me, you can write an email to this. And for now, I thank you for your kind attention and sorry about not being able to show that video.
And thank you, Claudia. We are a bit over the time. So I want to pick out maybe one of the first questions that we had in the chat, and maybe you can answer to the other question maybe afterwards, because it's hard to squeeze in all of the questions right now. One was, is computational chemistry or molecular modeling included in the GCHEM lab? Is that a topic that the students are dealing with?
Not in the lab part, but in the seminars, yes. We've got 2 sessions where they get to know how to draw chemical molecules, but they don't calculate or anything.
Okay. Good. So as I said, maybe we just continue, and you can have a look at the questions in the chat afterwards.